These are the headlines for May 18th, 2019 with Outrage News. Trump Hua's, Trump's Huawei ban confirms telecommunications are geopolitical weapons. As Trump warns of the surveillance danger of Huawei, the real concern of consumers should be the fact that they are being surveilled by the United States government and all tech companies, says Yasha Levine. From the Grip Post. While Trump brags about economy, millions are one paycheck away from financial ruin. The narrative of a booming economy is central to Donald Trump's 2020 re-election strategy, and a majority of all Americans approve of how Trump has handled economic matters. But that narrative isn't as rosy as it appears. Americans are struggling to afford basic necessities. The government shutdown last winter exposed how many Americans face disaster after missing just one paycheck, and Trump's tariffs threaten what tenuous growth the economy has shown. Now, a new study has shown that 51% of working adults cannot financially handle missing a single paycheck without savings. Another new study has shown 58% of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings. 40% of Americans lack a basic level of savings altogether. But as much as the overall economy is showing growth, the data suggests that Americans aren't actually better off. The rate of savings is not increasing. From the Grip Post. While Pentagon wastes $125 billion, Trump wants to cut $50 billion from public housing repairs. If how America spends its money shows what its priorities are, the Trump administration prioritizes Pentagon waste over public housing repairs. Many of the nation's public housing properties have been in disrepair for decades. Officials estimate that $50 billion is needed to conduct repairs of the nation's public housing, but the Trump administration wants to eliminate the fund for these repairs entirely. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has been hiding a 2015 report showing more than double that figure has been wasted on bureaucratic inefficiency. Senior Defense Department officials allegedly tried to bury the report, fearing that Congress would cut the defense budget if it knew of the bloated, wasteful spending. If Congress did reallocate $125 billion wasted by the Pentagon over 5 years, it could have made a major difference to Americans in public housing. The District of Columbia Housing Authority faces a monumental crisis, according to its executive director, Tyrone Garrett. About 1/3 of DC's public housing units are in such disrepair that they are unfit for human habitation. About 5,000 residents live in those units. As the nation faces a crisis of affordable housing, the decay of what little public housing exists exacerbates the problem. From Popular Resistance. Millions strong demonstrations in Algeria have forced authoritarian President Abdelaziz Bouteflika from office. Independent labor unions are fighting to ensure workers, not military officers, decide what happens next. Algeria is in the midst of a historic popular uprising. Protests began in February of this year as Algerians revolted against President Abdelaziz Bouteflika plans for a fifth term in office. Coming to power in 1999, Bouteflika suffered a debilitating stroke in 2013, after which he made few public appearances and was widely understood to be the puppet of a clique of high-ranking military figures. Protests intensified over the course of February and March, drawing millions to the streets of the capital, Algiers, and elsewhere, calling on Bouteflika to stand down before presidential elections originally slated for April 18th. In late March, the head of the armed forces, Ahmed Gaid Salah, called on the country's constitutional council, the equivalent of the Supreme Court, to declare Bouteflika unfit for office. Last month, the Octogarian leader officially announced his resignation, turning over the presidency to the former head of the Senate, Abdelkader Ben Salah, under the terms of the Algerian constitution. The latter plans to govern temporarily and oversee a new presidential election on July 4th. However, protesters remain unsatisfied, continuing to demonstrate against the corruption and in favor of a much deeper democratic transition. To get a closer look at the protests, Jacobin's Cole Strangler spoke with Algerian labor leader Rachid Malgouli. Since 2003, Malgouli has served as president of the SNAPAP, Autonomous Union of Public Sector Workers. He is also president of the CGATA, Autonomous General Confederation of Algerian Workers, a confederation of independent unions. Both are separate from the UGTA, General Union of Algerian Workers, the only union officially recognized by the Algerian government. The SNAPAP and CGATA have backed the protest movement since February. From Al Jazeera. Mexican journalist under government protection plan shot dead. Blood-soaked body of Francisco Romero, fifth journalist to be killed this year, was found on a pavement in his hometown. A Mexican journalist enrolled in the Federal Protection Program has been shot dead. The fifth reporter to be killed this year is one of the most dangerous countries for the press. The blood-soaked body of crime reporter Francisco Romero was found dead on a pavement outside a nightclub in his hometown of Playa del Carmen, along Mexico's Caribbean coast on Thursday, authorities said. Romero ran a Facebook-based news site called Ocurrió Aquí, It Happened Here, that covers local politics and crime and had more than 17,000 followers. He also worked for one of the state's leading newspapers, Quintana Roo Hoy. The state's prosecutor office opened a homicide investigation, saying Romero had filed a complaint on April 12th over threats he had received. The source of those threats was not specified. Truth Dig. Elizabeth Warren plans to radically Truth Dig. Elizabeth Warren unveils plan to radically reform Pentagon. Elizabeth Warren has likely heard the criticism. On Wednesday, the Massachusetts senator and 2020 Democratic hopeful issued a call for U.S. armed forces to go green, one that earned the ire of progressives like Naomi Klein for its failure to grapple with the size of America's military-industrial complex. Today, she unveiled a proposal that appears to address these concerns, at least in part. In a new essay posted to Medium titled, "It's Time to Reduce Corporate Influence at the Pentagon," Warren presents a four-point plan that includes prohibiting giant contractors from hiring senior officials at the Department of Defense, thereby slamming shut the revolving door. Between the two, banning defense officials from owning or trading related stocks, limiting, if not outright precluding, national security officials from accepting jobs with foreign governments, and exposing the lobbying done on behalf of companies like Lockheed Martin, which received more than $35 billion in defense contracts in 2017. Warren's latest policy initiative comes on the heels of President Donald Trump nominating Patrick Shanahan for Secretary of Defense. Shanahan has served as acting Secretary of Defense since James Mattis vacated the post in December of 2018. Prior to that, he spent 31 years as an executive at Boeing. From Popular Resistance. New York rejects Keystone-like pipeline in fierce battle over the state's energy future. In a major victory for environmental activists, New York regulators on Wednesday rejected the construction of a heavily disputed, nearly $1 billion natural gas pipeline, even as business leaders and energy companies warned that the decision could devastate the state's economy and bring a gas moratorium to New York City and Long Island. The pipeline was planned to run 37 miles, connecting natural gas fields in Pennsylvania to New Jersey and New York. Its operator, the Oklahoma-based Williams companies pitched it as a crucial addition to the region's energy infrastructure, one that would deliver enough fuel to satisfy New York's booming energy needs and stave off looming shortages. The environmental groups said Williams was manufacturing a crisis to justify a project that would rip apart fragile ecosystems, handcuff New York to fossil fuels, and hobble the state's march toward renewable resources. The result was an arcane but fevered battle over what was potentially New York's most fraught environmental decision since it banned fracking in 2014. The fight also took on political overtones as progressive activists pressed Governor Andrew M. Cuomo to urge his Department of Environmental Conservation to reject the application, casting it as a threat to his environmental legacy. These have been some of the headlines for May 18th, 2019. If you liked what you saw, heard, and read, please follow the channel on YouTube.